After one, Julian Vale brought his mistress to the most expensive private art gala in Manhattan, planning to introduce her as his future wife. Then the woman at the entrance smiled at them and said, "Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Vale." His mistress laughed. Julian went pale, because the woman holding the guest list was not a hostess. She was his wife. And by midnight, every billionaire in that room would know exactly what he had done. Julian stopped so suddenly that Serena Locke's hand tightened around his arm. Her silver dress shimmered under the gallery lights, cut low at the back and high at the thigh, a dress designed to be noticed by men who thought discretion was old-fashioned. She turned her head, her honey blonde hair sliding over one shoulder, her smile still in place. "What is it?" she whispered. Julian did not answer. He was staring at the woman behind the marble reception podium. Lillian March looked exactly as he had left her that morning. Calm, elegant, unreadable. Her dark auburn hair was pinned low at the nape of her neck. She wore a black velvet dress with long sleeves, no necklace, and a pair of pearl earrings so simple they looked almost modest. Her gray-green eyes moved once to Serena's fingers curled possessively around Julian's arm. Then they returned to Julian. No tears, no trembling, no scene. That was what frightened him first. "Enjoy the exhibition," Lillian said warmly. Her voice was smooth enough to pass for politeness. Only Julian heard the blade beneath it. Serena looked from Lillian to Julian. "You know her?" The gallery entrance was crowded behind them. Photographers flashed cameras along the staircase outside. Collectors in tailored coats handed invitations to staff. A string quartet played somewhere inside the building, soft and expensive, while waiters moved through the foyer with champagne. Julian felt trapped in the open. He had spent 9 months building a clean lie. Flights booked through company accounts, hotel suites paid from consulting retainers, dinner reservations under Serena's name. He had told Serena his marriage was dead. He had told himself Lillian was too quiet to notice. Now his wife stood 3 feet away, welcoming his mistress as Mrs. Vale. "Julian," Serena said, lower this time. "Who is she?" Lillian's mouth curved very slightly. Julian forced his voice to work. "My wife." Serena's hand slipped from his arm. Not dramatically, just enough for everyone near them to see the space open between their bodies. "Your wife?" she repeated. Lillian handed a program to the next couple with perfect grace. "Welcome to Marlowe House. The main reveal begins in 10 minutes. Marlowe House. The most private gallery in New York. The kind of place where invitations were not requested. They were granted. Tonight's event had been described as a closed exhibition for investors, collectors, museum directors, and a small number of financial partners. Julian had fought for an invitation because his firm was desperate to secure an art trust partnership worth more than $200 million. He had brought Serena because she loved rooms where rich people pretended not to stare at each other. He had not brought his wife because he thought she did not belong there. That was the second mistake of the night. The first was believing Lillian did not already know. Serena leaned closer, her perfume sharp and sweet. "You told me she never went anywhere. You told me she had no life outside that apartment." Julian swallowed. Across the foyer, Lillian stepped away from the podium. A tall, silver-haired woman in a white suit approached her and kissed both her cheeks. 2 men in Italian tuxedos waited behind her with the nervous patience of people hoping to be remembered. Julian recognized one of them. Elliot Crane, director of the Westbridge Museum. Elliot did not greet hostesses. He barely greeted donors, but he bowed his head slightly when Lillian turned to him. Julian's stomach tightened. Serena saw it too. "What exactly does your wife do?" she asked. Julian stared at Lillian as she spoke to Elliot Crane. Her expression remained composed, but the people around her leaned in as if her smallest sentence mattered. "She used to paint," he said. "Used to?" The words sounded foolish the moment they left his mouth. He remembered their first apartment after the wedding. Sunlight on old wooden floors, canvases stacked against walls, the smell of turpentine and coffee. Lillian used to paint barefoot in one of his shirts, auburn hair falling loose around her face, color smeared along her wrist. She had been brilliant then. Not famous, not rich, at least not in any way she talked about. Just quietly brilliant. Then life changed. Or rather, he changed. He worked later. She painted less. He stopped asking about her work because he stopped wanting answers that required attention. Eventually, the canvases disappeared. Julian assumed the dream had died. It never occurred to him that she might have stopped showing it to him. A chime sounded through the foyer. The lights dimmed. The crowd began moving toward the central gallery. Serena did not take his arm again. Julian barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on Lillian as she crossed the room toward a black curtain covering the largest wall. A man stepped onto the small stage beside her. Julian recognized him instantly. Marcus Wren, executive director of Marlowe House. A difficult man. Elegant, ruthless, famous for refusing money when he disliked the hand offering it. Marcus tapped the microphone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight for the private opening of The Rooms We Leave Behind. Conversation softened. Julian felt cold beneath his collar. Marcus continued. For nearly a year, this collection has circulated only as rumor among a handful of private collectors. Tonight, for the first time, the artist has agreed to reveal her name. Serena glanced at Julian. He did not move. Some part of him already knew. His body understood before his mind surrendered. Marcus turned toward Lillian. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce the founder of the March Atelier Trust, the owner of Marlowe House, and the artist behind this historic collection, Ms. Lillian March. For 1 second, the room went silent. Then applause broke like thunder. Serena's lips parted. Julian forgot how to breathe. Owner, trust, artist. Lillian stepped onto the stage under warm white light, calm as if she had not just split her husband's life open in public. She accepted the microphone from Marcus and looked across the room. Her eyes passed over Julian, not stopping. That hurt more than if she had stared. Thank you for being here, Lillian said. This collection began with a question I was too proud to ask out loud. How long can a woman live beside someone who has already left her? The room stilled. Julian's fingers curled around the program in his hand. Lillian turned toward the black curtain. The first answer was silence. The painting behind it was enormous. A man sat alone in the back seat of a black car at night. His face was blurred by the reflection of city lights on the window, but his hand was visible, resting near a woman's silver-clad knee. The woman herself was mostly outside the frame. Only the curve of her thigh, the shine of her dress, and the bracelet at her wrist remained. Serena looked down at her own bracelet. Silver diamonds. Thin chain. Julian had given it to her 2 weeks earlier in a hotel suite overlooking the river. Her face changed. The painting's title appeared on a small brass plaque, passenger seat. No names, no accusation, no obvious scandal. That made it worse. Collectors moved closer. A museum director near the front whispered, "That restraint is extraordinary." Another woman said softly, "It feels like being betrayed before anyone says the word." Julian's throat tightened. He remembered the night. The black car. Serena's hand sliding over his wrist. His phone face down on the seat, because Lillian had called twice. He remembered ignoring the calls and telling himself he would say he was in a late meeting. He had not known anyone was watching. How could she have watched? Lillian spoke again. People imagine betrayal as a door slamming, but most betrayal arrives quietly. A delayed reply. A changed password. A chair left empty long enough that emptiness becomes part of the furniture. The second curtain dropped. This painting showed a dining table set for two. One plate untouched. One glass filled. One phone glowing beside a folded napkin. The background was dark, except for the soft gold light over the table. The empty chair seemed louder than a person. The title was Reservation for Two. Julian felt heat crawl up his neck. That was their anniversary dinner. 8 months earlier, Lillian had booked a small French restaurant they used to love. Julian had forgotten. No, worse. He had remembered at 5, then ignored it at 7, because Serena had surprised him at his office in a red coat and said she had a suite waiting. He had texted Lillian at 9. Do not wait. Work disaster. He came home after midnight to find the dining room dark. Lillian was awake by the window, still wearing a navy dress, her lipstick faded, one earring already removed. He had kissed her forehead and said, "You understand." She had answered, "Yes." He thought that meant forgiveness. Now he realized it meant record. Serena whispered, "Julian." He did not look at her. Lillian stood beneath the lights, composed and almost gentle. She was not performing pain. She had refined it until the whole room wanted to look, and could not bear to. Marcus stood near the stage, watching her with open respect. Julian hated that respect. He had spent years taking Lillian's quietness as proof that she needed him, that she was fragile, that she had retreated from the world after her early art attempts failed. He had not seen her retreat as strategy. He had not seen much at all. A third curtain fell. This painting showed a hotel suite at dawn. The bed was unmade, but no bodies were shown. A champagne bottle sweated on a side table. A pair of high heels lay beside a man's jacket. Through the windows, Manhattan glowed pale blue and indifferent. Title: Temporary Room. Serena stepped back. Her silver dress, which had looked bold at the entrance, now looked like evidence. A man behind Julian murmured to his wife, "Whoever inspired this should leave before dessert." The wife answered, "No, he should stay and suffer." A few people nearby laughed softly. Julian did not. Serena's eyes flashed with humiliation. "You said she did not know," she whispered. "I thought she did not." "You thought?" He finally turned toward her. Serena Locke was 28, bright-eyed, ambitious, and skilled at making wealthy men feel chosen. Julian had met her at a private banking reception, where she worked in client relations. She had complimented his speech, then his watch, then his loneliness. He had liked her because she admired him easily. He had loved, if that was the word, how she did not remember the version of him that once waited in line for cheap coffee with paint on his sleeve because Lillian's canvases were drying across the kitchen floor. Serena only knew the polished Julian, managing partner, expensive suits, driver on call, city memberships, names at restaurants. She had never seen the man Lillian had helped build. And now, under Lillian's paintings, even Serena was beginning to see the scaffolding. "I thought your marriage was dead," Serena said. Julian looked back at the stage. "So did I." The answer sounded thin, almost childish. Lillian had moved to the fourth painting. This one showed a woman standing alone in a penthouse bedroom at sunrise. She wore an evening gown, barefoot, one hand resting against the glass. Behind her, the city was waking. On the bed lay a man's tuxedo jacket, discarded and empty. Title: Before He Came Home. The crowd drew in a collective breath. Not because the woman looked abandoned. Because she did not. She looked finished. A critic near the front said, "She is not waiting anymore." Lillian heard him and smiled faintly. That was the moment the collection changed. A reporter raised her hand. "Changed how?" Lillian looked toward the painting. "At first, I thought I was painting absence. Then I realized I was painting evidence. Not legal evidence. Emotional evidence. The kind women are often told does not count because it leaves no bruises." Several women in the room nodded. Julian's stomach turned. He remembered saying those exact things. "You are imagining distance. You are reading into nothing. You make silence sound like a crime." For years he had used reason like a locked door. Now Lillian had turned every 3. The West Gallery opened at 9. By then, 3 paintings had sold. Not reserved. Sold. Julian heard the numbers whispered behind him, low and controlled, as if speaking them too loudly would be vulgar. 1.8 million. 2.4. 3 pending offers. His phone vibrated nonstop. Messages from his assistant. "Where are you? Crane wants to speak with you." Marlowe House is tied to March Atelier. Did you know? "Julian, call me immediately." He ignored them. He could not leave. Leaving would look guilty. Staying felt like punishment. Serena walked beside him without touching him. Her earlier confidence had drained away. She kept her chin high, but her eyes moved quickly, measuring exits, faces, risks. She had arrived imagining herself as the future. Now she looked like a woman realizing she had been used as a prop in someone else's exposure. At the entrance to the West Gallery, Lillian stood beside Marcus Wren and a woman Julian recognized from the board of the Metropolitan Arts Fund. The woman held both of Lillian's hands. "You have no idea what this will mean," she said. "For women artists, for the fund, for the conversation." Lillian smiled. "I hope it means they stop apologizing for what they survived." The woman squeezed her hands. Julian looked away. Serena saw the movement. "You told me she was shy." "She was." "No," Serena said. "You just preferred her silent." The sentence landed with unexpected force. Julian turned sharply. "This is not the time." Serena laughed once, softly and bitterly. "That is what men say when the truth arrives before they are dressed for it." Before he could answer, Marcus stepped toward the microphone again. "Ladies and gentlemen, before you enter the West Gallery, I want to clarify a detail many of you have already asked about. The rooms we leave behind is not only an exhibition, it is the opening program of the March Atelier Trust's new residency fund for women artists rebuilding after financial or emotional coercion." A murmur moved through the room. Julian went still. Financial coercion. Serena looked at him. Marcus continued. "Miss March has committed the first $50 million from her family's private holdings to acquire studio spaces, legal resources, and long-term grants. Marlowe House will serve as the Trust's flagship institution." 50 million. Family holdings. Flagship institution. Julian felt the room tilt. He knew Lillian came from old money, vaguely. Everyone knew the March family had once owned mills, warehouses, and a handful of forgotten buildings along the river. Lillian spoke of it rarely. She lived modestly compared with people of her circle. She took taxis, wore old coats, kept accounts herself, and refused to discuss inheritance in social settings. Julian had interpreted that as decline, a faded family name, a woman with history but no liquidity. He had been wrong in the most expensive way possible. The March family had not disappeared. They had gone private, and Lillian had not been dependent on him for years. She had allowed him to believe that because a man who thought he was the provider revealed himself more honestly. The West Gallery doors opened. Inside, the lighting was darker. Each painting stood in its own pool of light, with enough space around it to make the viewer feel alone. The first canvas showed a woman seated on the floor beside a closed studio door. Her knees were drawn up, her hands stained with paint, while light spilled from the keyhole. Outside the door, a man's shadow passed without stopping. Title: He Never Knocked. Julian remembered the studio. Their apartment had a room at the end of the hall. Lillian once called it her weather room because the light changed there all day. After they moved into the penthouse, she set up easels inside it. For the first year, she invited him in often. "Come see this," she would say. He would say, "Later." Later became tomorrow. Tomorrow became next week. Eventually, she stopped asking. He told himself she had stopped painting. The truth had been kinder and more damning. She had stopped inviting him. A young curator nearby said, "It is devastating how the figure is locked outside her own gift." Julian looked at the painting and felt something twist. Beside him, Serena's face softened despite herself. "She loved you," she said quietly. He wanted to deny the tenderness in her voice. He wanted her jealous, angry, defensive, anything but honest. "I know," he said. "No," Serena replied. "You do not. That is why you are standing here like a man surprised by a fire he lit." A group of collectors moved past them. One of them, a man Julian had pitched to twice, glanced at Julian and frowned with recognition. His gaze moved to Serena, then to Lillian across the room. The calculation was immediate. Julian saw it happen. People in rooms like this did not need full explanations. They lived on implication. A mistress in silver beside a husband watching his wife's betrayal paintings sell for millions was enough. His phone vibrated again. This time, he checked it. From his senior partner, Malcolm Reeve. Need to know if there is a personal issue involving you and Lillian March. Our fund proposal may be compromised. Julian's palm dampened. Their firm, Bailey Reeve Capital, had spent 6 months courting the March Atelier Trust. Julian had led the pitch himself. He had spoken grandly about cultural assets, ethical stewardship, legacy capital. He had not known he was pitching his wife. Or perhaps worse. She had known and let him pitch. Serena read the message over his shoulder. Her face went very still. You said tonight was just networking. It is. Julian. He slipped the phone into his pocket. Do not start. She stared at him. You brought me here to impress the people whose money you need, but the money belongs to your wife. He said nothing. Serena stepped back as if he had become physically unpleasant. The second painting in the West Gallery showed a man standing before a mirror, adjusting his cufflinks, while behind him a woman sat blurred at a breakfast table. The title was polished. A critic laughed softly. Cruel, another answered. Accurate. Julian moved on. He could feel the room learning him. That was impossible, of course. No painting named him. No placard described his affair. Lillian had given the public no scandal, no gossip, no easy violence. Yet the work created a shape, and Julian was trapped inside it. Every empty chair looked like him. Every delayed message sounded like him. Every reflected man wore his posture. That was Lillian's genius. She had not exposed his secret by shouting it. She had made his behavior recognizable to everyone who had ever been harmed by it. Julian saw her approach and moved quickly, but not quickly enough. The final painting was the largest in the West Gallery. A woman stood on a rooftop at dawn, the city behind her glowing gold. Her black dress moved in the wind. Her face was calm, her shoulders straight, her hands empty. Not lonely. Released. The title was After the Door Closed. Lillian stood beside it, speaking with a museum trustee. Serena waited until the trustee stepped away. Then she smiled. It was not her old smile, not the sparkling one she used in restaurants when she wanted a man to feel successful. This smile was tight, defensive, frightened. Lillian, she said. Lillian turned. Serena. The fact that she knew the name made Serena blink. Julian stopped several feet away. He should have interrupted. He did not. Some cowardly part of him wanted to hear what the two women would say when neither of them was protected by his version of events. Serena lifted her chin. I think you have the wrong idea about me. Lillian's expression did not change. Do I? Julian told me your marriage was over. That seems to be a favorite sentence among married men who want unmarried benefits. A nearby woman heard and looked sharply away, hiding a smile. Serena flushed. He said you barely spoke to him. I stopped wasting language. He said you did not care where he went. I stopped asking questions, he answered badly. Serena's jaw tightened. For a second, Julian saw the sharper woman beneath the silk, the one who had not merely been seduced, but had chosen ambition and called it love. You know, Serena said softly, for months I thought you were pathetic. The air changed. Julian stepped forward. Serena. Lillian raised one hand slightly, not to silence him, to dismiss him. The gesture froze him in place. Serena continued, reckless now. I thought you were one of those women who kept a ring because you had nothing else. A quiet wife in a quiet apartment, waiting for a man who had already chosen someone younger. A few people had stopped pretending not to listen. Lillian studied Serena for a long moment. There was no hatred in her face. That was what made it lethal. You thought youth was a victory because Julian sold you a race I was never running. Serena's lips parted. Lillian stepped closer, her voice still low enough to be elegant. You did not win my husband, Serena. You inherited his appetite. That is not a prize. It is a maintenance problem. Someone nearby coughed into a champagne glass. Serena's face burned. Julian felt the words strike him too. Lillian turned slightly toward him at last. And you, she said, brought her into a room I own, wearing a bracelet purchased with a card attached to an account my auditors flagged 6 weeks ago. Serena looked down at her wrist. Julian's stomach dropped. You audited me? He said. Lillian looked almost amused. You used joint household funds to buy jewelry for another woman, then submitted travel meals under a cultural investment account tied to my trust proposal. I did not need to audit you, Julian. You walked mud across a white floor. Serena unclasped the bracelet as if it burned her. You told me that was from your personal account. Julian's mouth dried. It was complicated. Lillian gave a soft laugh. No. It was theft made small enough for you to pronounce comfortably. Serena placed the bracelet on the nearest service tray. Her fingers shook. I did not know about the account. Lillian looked at her. For the first time, her expression softened a fraction. Not forgiveness. Assessment. I believe you did not know the accounting structure, she said. I do not believe you did not know he was married. Serena swallowed. No answer came, because there was none. From across the room, Marcus Wren approached, with a folded paper in hand. His eyes moved briefly from Lillian to Julian to Serena, taking in the scene with the discretion of a man who had seen richer scandals and less elegant consequences. Lillian, he said. The Berlin Museum confirmed. They want the rooftop piece for the fall retrospective. Lillian glanced at the painting. The final one? Yes. They are prepared to meet the trust's terms. Julian stared at the painting. The final one. The woman after the door closed. His wife's release was now a museum acquisition. That should not have hurt. It did. Serena laughed once, a small broken sound. So this is what tonight is? You destroy him, and everyone applauds? Lillian looked back at her. No. Tonight is what happens when a woman stops hiding what nearly destroyed her. Serena's eyes filled, but she did not cry. Perhaps she was too proud. Perhaps she knew tears would not save her in this room. Julian moved closer to Lillian. Can we speak privately? No. The refusal was immediate. Several heads turned. His face heated. Lillian, you do not get privacy from me tonight, she said. You used privacy to rot everything. The sentence cut deeper because it was true. He had hidden behind private calls, private rooms, private excuses, private pain imposed on her in public silence. Now she stood in public with truth and gave him nothing to. The formal announcement came at 10. Julian had just stepped into a side corridor to call Malcolm Reeve when Marcus returned to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, before we close the evening, Ms. Partnerships. Julian stopped mid-call. Malcolm's voice crackled through the speaker. Julian, are you there? Julian lowered the phone. Lillian stepped onto the stage again. The applause this time was not introductory. It was warm, eager, almost protective. The room had chosen her. Julian could feel it. Worse, he understood why. She had given them pain with dignity, wealth with purpose, revenge without vulgarity. The combination was irresistible to people who loved power but preferred it perfumed. Lillian held the microphone with both hands. The March Atelier Trust was created by my grandmother, Helena March, who believed art should never depend on the mercy of people who benefit from silence. In that spirit, the trust has concluded its review of potential financial partners. Julian's heart slammed once against his ribs. Malcolm was still on the phone. He heard the announcement through the line. Lillian continued, We will not be proceeding with Vale Reeve Capital. A soft murmur passed through the crowd. Julian closed his eyes. Malcolm cursed quietly through the phone. Lillian's voice remained calm. This decision follows a compliance review of expense handling, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and conduct inconsistent with the standards of stewardship required by this trust. No names, no direct accusation. Enough for every serious person in the room to understand. Julian felt the collapse happen in layers. First, Malcolm hung up. Then two investors near the bar looked at him and turned away. Then Elliot Crane, who had once promised to take Julian's call after the gala, glanced at him with cold recognition and moved to the other side of the room. Serena stood near the entrance, coat over her arm, face pale. She had heard. Everyone had heard. Julian walked toward Lillian as she stepped down from the stage. Was that necessary? He asked. His voice came out lower than intended, rough with humiliation. Lillian handed the microphone back to Marcus and turned to him. Was what necessary? Ruining my firm's proposal in front of everyone. I did not ruin it. Your records did. You could have handled this privately. Her eyes held his. You keep saying that as if privacy is a virtue. It is not. Sometimes privacy is where men put things they do not want named. Julian's jaw tightened. This is revenge. No, Lillian said. Revenge would have been easier. This is governance. The word stunned him more than anger would have. Governance. Not heartbreak. Not jealousy. Not punishment. A board decision. A risk review. A consequence. She had moved him from husband to liability. That was the real death of the marriage. A waiter passed with champagne. Lillian declined. Julian took a glass and forgot to drink it. His phone buzzed again. Message from Malcolm. You are suspended pending review. Do not contact clients. Julian stared at the screen. Suspended. The word looked unreal. He had spent years cultivating a reputation for control. He wore control like his suits. His calendar was full, his restaurants known, his friendships strategic. Serena had been part of that image, whether he admitted it or not. Proof he was still desired. Still powerful. Still moving upward. Now one evening had stripped the polish away. Serena approached slowly. I am leaving, she said. Julian looked up. Not now. Exactly now. Serena, do not make this worse. Her eyes flashed. Worse for whom? He lowered his voice. We can talk tomorrow. No, she said. Tomorrow you will be unemployed, publicly toxic, and trying to convince me this is all her fault. Several people nearby looked over. Julian's face hardened. Careful. Serena laughed, but there was no humor in it. That is the first honest thing you have said tonight. You are not sorry. You are embarrassed. He said nothing. She looked toward Lillian, then back at him. You told me she was dull. Julian's mouth tightened. You told me she had no ambition, no money of her own, no world outside you. Serena's voice shook now, not with grief, but with fury at being made foolish. You did not leave your wife because you were trapped. You stayed because she was useful, and you cheated because I was easy. The words struck cleanly. Lillian did not look away. Serena pulled a small velvet box from her clutch and threw it lightly onto Julian's chest. He caught it by reflex. Inside was a diamond pendant he had given her the month before. I do not want gifts funded by another woman's silence, Serena said. Then she walked out. The photographers outside caught the moment she descended the gallery steps alone. By morning, people would know enough. They always did. Julian remained under the lights with the box in his hand, watching the mistress he had flaunted leave the wife he had underestimated behind. Lillian turned to Marcus. Please make sure Miss Locke gets a car. Julian stared at her. You are helping her? I am not helping her, Lillian said. After 6, Julian returned to the penthouse 3 weeks later to find half the apartment gone. Not messy, not dramatic. Gone. Lillian's reading chair by the east window had vanished. The wall where her small sketches used to hang showed pale rectangles in the paint. Her books were missing from the shelves. The studio door at the end of the hall stood open, the room empty except for clean floors and a faint scent of linseed oil. He walked through the apartment slowly. Every absence was organized. That was what made it unbearable. She had not stormed out. She had extracted herself. In the kitchen, on the marble counter, sat a manila envelope and her wedding ring. Julian stood there for a long moment before touching either. The ring looked smaller than he remembered. Plain gold, chosen during a time when he had convinced himself simplicity meant purity. He had said large diamonds were vulgar. Lillian had smiled then, not because she agreed, but because she was in love enough to let him mistake preference for principle. He opened the envelope. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Asset separation agreement. Notice of forensic accounting review. Affidavit concerning misuse of joint household funds. Every page had been prepared. Every signature placed. Every path closed. There was no note. He laughed once, under his breath. What did wrong in the empty kitchen? Of course, there was no note. Lillian had written the note across 30 paintings and sold it to museums. His phone rang. Malcolm Reeve. Julian answered. For 15 minutes, he listened as his senior partner explained suspension, client concerns, reputational exposure, internal review, and the need for distance. Distance. That word appeared often when powerful men wanted someone else to carry the stain. You are pushing me out, Julian said. Malcolm sighed. You pushed yourself out when you used a client-linked expense structure to impress your girlfriend inside your wife's institution. Julian gripped the counter. That is not what happened. It is exactly what happened from a governance standpoint. Governance again. He hated the word. When the call ended, Julian sat on the kitchen floor. He did not know why. Perhaps because the chairs felt too formal for collapse. Rain tapped against the windows. The city glowed beyond the glass, indifferent and vast. He thought of Lillian in the early years. Her laughing as she painted a blue line across his wrist and called it accidental ownership. Her falling asleep on his shoulder in cheap theater seats. Her standing in a half-finished studio, asking if he thought a canvas was too dark. He had answered emails while she waited for his opinion. He could not remember what he said. That frightened him. Not because memory failed, because attention had. 2 months passed. The divorce moved faster than he expected, because Lillian had protected everything long before he understood there was anything to protect. The penthouse belonged to a March family holding company. The art assets were trust property. Her liquid accounts had never mixed with his. Even the modest household account he had misused was documented cleanly enough that his attorney advised settlement. Serena did not return his calls. After the gala, she resigned from her banking role and took a job in Los Angeles. Her final message arrived 1 week later. I liked the man you pretended to be. That is not enough. Julian read it 3 times, then deleted it. His world narrowed. Restaurants stopped having tables. Calls went unanswered. Invitations slowed, then stopped. People did not accuse him. They did worse. They became busy. One night in late winter, he sat alone in the back of a hired car while rain moved slowly down the windows. He had been interviewing with a smaller firm in Midtown, the kind that once would have begged for him. Now even they spoke in cautious phrases. Potential reputational concern. Client sensitivity. Let us circle back. The car stopped at a red light near Madison Avenue. Julian looked up, and there she was. Lillian March, 30 feet high on the side of a museum building. A black dress, pearl earrings, calm gray-green eyes. Behind her, the rooftop painting glowed in gold. The billboard read, Lillian March, The Rooms We Leave Behind, International Retrospective opening this spring beneath it, in smaller letters, presented by the March Atelier Trust. The driver glanced at the rearview mirror. Beautiful, right? My wife wants tickets. Sold out already. Julian stared at the billboard. For a second, his chest tightened so violently he thought it might be pain. Then he understood. It was recognition arriving too late. He had once believed losing Lillian would look like a woman crying in an apartment he controlled. Instead, Chapter 7, Lillian stood in the completed east wing of Marlowe House on the morning of the public opening. No champagne. No cameras yet. No wealthy applause. Just pale sunlight across polished concrete floors and the faint smell of fresh paint. The new wing had once been a storage warehouse owned by her grandmother. Years ago, Helena March had brought Lillian there as a child and said, buildings are like people. The ones everyone calls useless usually need better light. Lillian had remembered. Now the building held studios, legal offices, counseling rooms, and a residency floor for women artists beginning again, after marriages, Contracts, families, or institutions had trained them to doubt their own names. Marcus Wren walked beside her with a clipboard. The first residents arrived Monday, he said. 4 painters, 1 sculptor, 2 textile artists, and a photographer from Detroit. Lillian nodded. Good. He studied her. You seem quiet. She smiled faintly. I am often quiet. People keep misreading it. Marcus laughed softly. They stopped before a blank wall near the entrance. A brass plaque waited beneath a protective cloth. Ready? He asked. Lillian reached up and removed the cloth. The plaque read, The Helena March Studio Fund. For those who were told their silence was peace. Lillian touched the edge of the brass with her fingertips. For a moment, she thought of the gala. The silver dress, Julian's pale face, Serena's trembling hands, the applause, the sales, the interviews, the strange public beauty of a private wound. People called that night her revenge. They were wrong. Revenge would have kept Julian at the center. This was the opposite. This was a life built so far beyond him that his betrayal became only one room she had walked through on her way to something larger. Later, when the public arrived, reporters asked careful questions. Do you think pain creates great art? Lillian shook her head. No. Pain interrupts. Art is what happens when a person refuses to let the interruption be the final sentence. Another reporter asked, And what do you hope women feel when they leave this exhibition? Lillian looked toward the new studio wing, where sunlight fell across unopened doors. Permission, she said. Not to suffer beautifully. To stop making themselves smaller for people who only love them when they are convenient. By noon, the museum steps were full. Visitors lined the sidewalk. Young artists held notebooks. Older women stood in pairs, quiet and bright-eyed. A mother lifted her daughter to see Lillian's portrait on the banner above the door. Lillian watched from the upper window for a moment before stepping back. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I finally understand. I am sorry. No name appeared. None was needed. Lillian looked at the message, felt the old pain stir, and waited for it to become anger. It did not. It had become history. She deleted the message. Then she walked downstairs to open the doors. Outside, the city was loud, impatient, alive. Inside, the rooms waited, filled with light. Lillian placed one hand on the brass handle and breathed in. For years, she had thought silence was something that happened to her. Now she knew silence could be a studio, a courtroom, a grave, or a beginning. It depended on what a woman built inside it. She opened the doors. And this time, the world entered on her terms. If you enjoy stories about quiet strength, hidden power, and made for immersive listening,